Hi Bookworms, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well. Today's video is all the books I read in January, so with further ado, let's get straight into it and see what books they were. So before I go into what I did read for January, I just want to go over the books that I didn't read. So the first two books I don't actually physically own. The first one is Sword of Kagan, which was the buddy read for Sid's Patreon. I just didn't get around to do it. It was on my Kindle. I went to try and do it at the end of January, but it was like over 400 pages and that was on my Kindle, and I was just like, there's no way I'm going to finish it. And to be honest, by that point I wasn't feeling grand and I was just not in the mood to read that book, so I was like, nope, I won't read it. Which is annoying because I obviously wanted to try and read at least one of the books on Sid's Patreon book choices, because the next book, which was actually our book club pick, is All of Us Villains, and I had to DNF it purely because it was quite triggering for me. I don't know why it was. Let's just say it was a very dark version to The Hunger Games. Now, I don't know whether it's because I'm now a mum and when it's your children pretty much fighting to win but they could die sort of thing, whether it's too much for me, because like my worst sort of nightmare is my daughter dying, and obviously my daughter did very come close to that when she was a baby, so I don't know whether just that kind of just was like, nope, like I can't read it. Like I read The Hunger Games before I had Alice, like I read it when they first came out. I watched the movie before I had Alice too, and I did recently watch the first two movies. The first two movies. Again, like the second time, and I did have Alice, and I couldn't watch them. It was just, I was like, no, I can't. And I think being a mother has just changed what I can watch. Like horror movies, I'm very not brilliant with anymore now, just because it's just too much for me. But like I read probably about 3 chapters of that book, and they weren't really chapters, they were names, like the different contestants in this game. But I tried and I was like, I can't. Like I was getting so angry because I didn't like any of the characters. I didn't like the parents of one particular character, because the father was pretty much did not care that if his daughter doesn't win, she actually would die. He didn't care, and I did not like it, and to me felt like the book was sort of promoting abuse in some ways, because the parents are quite happy for their children to do this and to pretty much die, and if they don't win, because there's only one winner, it was just, I couldn't. And a lot of, I've seen everyone's like opinions on the book, and they really enjoyed it. A lot of them have given them 5 stars, some have given 4 stars, so, but I just personally couldn't. It really messed me up a little bit, and I was just like, no, I'm not going to force myself to read a book that clearly is triggering me for whatever reason, so I didn't do that. Also, I didn't read Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo, so I did read the second book, which I'll get to in a minute. The reason why I didn't pick this up is I wasn't overly fussed with the second book. I enjoyed it in some parts, but I got a little bit fed up with the political bit, which got really slow at one point and quite boring. And it was mainly Mal. Mal just really peeved me off. I just thought he was whiny, annoying. He just had like possessive issues, in my opinion, and he just drove me insane while I was reading Siegen Storm, and it just put me off reading this, because I was like, I really don't want him to be like this in this book, because honestly, if that's the case, I think I will, I love Shadow and Bone. I was really hoping to love the Siegen Storm, and there were some parts of that book that I did love, but then just Mal, and I was just like, I kind of feel like I hope Mal's different in this, but I'm also a bit worried that he might not be, and he might still annoy me, and then that would just make me not enjoy the book. So I do want to finish this, because then I finish that trilogy and then I can go on to King of Scars, because obviously I want to read that. But at the moment I'm like, I need to just have a break from my seething moments with Mal and then go back to this when I've gotten sorted. And then also Prayer of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I really do want to pick this up, but it's a chunky book and I get so scared of it, because I did try reading this. I tried reading this when I had COVID, which was probably not the best time to read it. It was the best time to read in the sense that I had 10 days where I could probably completely focus and bash this book out, but I wasn't in the mind space to read a book that has a lot of world building and a lot of words that I do not understand. And I do have this on audiobook, but it wasn't the right time, and then I kept leaving it, and there was no way I was going to read this chunky book the last 2 days of January. However, I am doing the 12 book recs by 12 friends challenge, and this is one of the recs people have given me. So I think I still want to read this, but I think I might make room 1 month when, like, you know, I might just make sure I don't have so many books on my TBR so I can read this, because everybody who has read this said it's excellent, and I have got it on audio, so I think if I listen and read along with it, it'll be easier. It's just I need to be in a good mind space for it, and I wasn't when I picked it up, but it will be read. I'm determined to read it for this year, because it was meant to be read last year, because it was my 21 books in 2021, but we never got there. So those are the books that I didn't read. Now we're on to the books that I did read, and I can tell you now, I read some books that were on my TBR. I read some books that weren't on my TBR. So yeah, it's a mixed match. But first up, I did a reread because I was so in the mood for it. I did a reread for ACOTAR. So I read A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, and I loved it second time round. I honestly felt like reading it second time round, I wouldn't enjoy it as much because I knew what happened and things like that. But it's been over a year since I read this series, and honestly, like, I read some of this, like, there were some parts of this book I knew, like, you know, chapter 55 in this, everyone knows that off by heart and stuff like that. It, you know, I just couldn't believe how much I enjoyed this second time round, and I feel like I enjoyed it even more. Like, a lot of people say when you read a book the first time round, you don't get the whole first enjoyment feel like you do when you first read a story, but I honestly felt I had that again second time round. I don't know whether it's such a beloved series. I don't know whether it's because it's been so long since I read it and I had forgotten bits that, you know, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't on my TBR, and I can honestly tell you I want to pick up the rest of the books, which I might do in February if I've got a chance to squeeze them in. But I absolutely love this. Again, these are 5 stars second time round. I was just in the mood to read these. It was more the end of my COVID isolation, and I was like, I just really feel like I'm in a mood to read this, because it's just an easy read. It wasn't too much to remember because I did remember the story thing. I loved it. It is a beloved series. I think I'm gonna love it forever, regardless. So I read them. They weren't on my TBR, but who cares? What was on my TBR was my book club pick, which was Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. Loved this book. This is my top book of this month, and I honestly think this is going to be my top book of this year. I just loved it. I still, like, you know, this was one of the first books I read in January, and I can still remember everything about this book, and we're on the 2nd of February as I film this. I just love this. It had, you know, the forbidden romance, enemies to lovers trope. We also had arranged marriage, which seems to be my kind of thing. We had amazing witchcraft, which I've obviously got quite a big buzz for witchy books at the moment, because I just feel like that's all I want to read. This was just amazing. It was absolutely brilliant. The world building, the writing, the character building, everything. Like, even some of the nasty people in this book, I sort of still liked. I loved it, and it's very clear that a lot of my book club members really enjoyed this too. I'm very excited. We're just waiting for one person to finish, which I think is very soon. And then we're pretty much just going to discuss the hell out of this book and just say how much we loved it. I actually have, since reading this, bought book 2 and book 3. A lot of people say book 2 isn't as good because it's very much Reed's trying to deal with knowing that God, I've forgotten the name. I can't forget the name. Is it Louise? I'm sure it's Louise. Lou, yeah, Louise, Lou. I was right. Don't doubt myself. Like, Louise is obviously, I think, read in the second book, it's him realising that Lou is a witch, but also realising who his mum is and the fact that his mum's a witch, and also, this might be a spoiler if you haven't watched it, read the book, sorry, but also that he is a witch and he is the first male witch ever. So I think the second book's mainly focusing on like him and him dealing with all of that, and so I feel like the romance side of things between Lou and Reed is a bit not as much as in here. Like, a lot of people didn't like the second book. They said it just was a bit naff, but the third book like went out with a bang, like even better than this one. So I have got that in mind, that the second book might not be as good, but I have found a lot of people say that, and I've read books in the series and I feel like the book gets better and better, so we'll see. But I definitely want to finish this series soon because I absolutely loved it. But yeah, definitely one of my top books in this month, and definitely I think a contender for this whole year. And then obviously on my TBR was Siegen Storm. I did read this. I gave, oh yes, Serpent and Dove was 5 stars, if you did not realise. I gave this 4 stars. If we didn't have the slow part, which was like the political side and all of that, it would probably budged up to a 4.5. I may have even given it a 5-star and ignored Mal. But because there was like a bit in this book, there's quite a big chunk of this book where it just got a bit slow, and it was obviously Alina doing the political side of things, running running soldiers like the Grisha lot to fight the Darkling. It was obviously her learning all this political side of things, which I understand and I get why it was in the book. I just don't care for it when there's so much of it, because I'm just not that kind of person. It doesn't interest me. But I feel like if that wasn't as much, I would have given this 5 stars regardless of my opinion of Mal. But because there was a lot of Mal in this and a lot of the political side, I couldn't give it a 5 stars because, I'm going to be honest, I really could not stand it. I could not stand Mal. I cannot still stand Mal. I hope he gets better in the third book. I know from seeing character art and things like that, I do know that they are together forever, that kind of thing. So I do know they end up obviously being a couple properly and blah blah blah. But at the moment, he's just a very whiny teenager who is extremely possessive, wants to change Alina, which is just a big no-no, and I just cannot stand him at the minute. And because of that, and because he's got quite a big deal in this book as well, I was just, I was really dragging myself to finish this book. There was parts where I was like, I don't want to read it anymore. He's peeving me off. So, like I said earlier, I do want to finish this series off, because then, like, I can go into reading King of Stars, because obviously that's about Nikolai, but I need to read these series before I go into that, because, there'll probably be spoilers. But it's very hard to, because I'm sort of like, is Mal going to be as annoying in the third book or not? So if you read the full third book and you thought Mal was annoying in the second book, can you let me know whether he does sort of, if he's still a whiny, annoying person, or whether he does like man up and sort his shite out, basically. And then I also read, which you would have seen a vlog for this, hopefully soon. I have done the vlog. I haven't uploaded it, but hopefully you will see this before this. We'll see. You might see it afterwards, but whatever. I read These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong, which is for the 12 books, 12 Rex challenge I'm doing. So I did start reading this when I got COVID. I got to, I think, page 86, something like that. And I did enjoy it. It's just I really didn't understand why people class this as a fantasy. I still don't know why it's classed as a fantasy, because to me, I didn't think it was. But nonetheless, I did enjoy this, surprisingly. I felt the first half was quite slow, and I was like, oh, just get to it. But understandably, it is the first book in a duology, and you do need to do some world building, and I do hate books where there isn't much world building and you're just shoved straight into action, all these certain things, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on? So I am one of those people that I like to have the world building, just so I can get a sense of the scene and everything, but I don't like too much, because sometimes it gets a little bit boring and I want to get into the plot, which this had that for a bit, but then it did start picking up, and I was like, ooh. But by the last half of this book, I sped through it. I was so interested. We've got a little bit of romance in, and then right at the end was a massive big twist and a cliffhanger, and I was like, So I desperately want to read the second book just to see what happens. But I might instead get that on my Kindle rather than actually own the book, because as much as I read this, I did enjoy it. It's not a book I would reread and keep, so I think this is going to be like an unhaul. But I definitely think I want to read the second book. I might get it on my Kindle and just see how it ends, sort of thing. But this was 4 stars. This surprised me because I wasn't sure whether I was going to like it. A lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it. I'm the one in the middle where I did and I didn't. Like, I'm neutral. Like, would I shout off the roof and saying everyone needs to read this? No. Would I suggest it to people who I think likes this kind of stuff? Yes. But yeah, I really did enjoy it. I really love how Romeo and Juliet, the big massive retelling of this wasn't your, star-crossed lovers who end up not together because blah blah blah. Like, it was not that. It was a Romeo and Juliet, something happened, and now that you've got like the gang war and everything, but it is basically them working together to try and find this monster and this contagion, and obviously make their country not be completely wiped out. Yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I'm certainly very intrigued to see what the second book happens, how that ends, whether Roma and Juliet do end up together or not. So yeah, definitely want to pick the second book up at some point. I'm not in a rush to do so, but I definitely do want to read it. But I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I actually did end up reading it and not given up, because I was surprised by it. Next up, Jade City by Fonda Lee, which is the only book that I read for Sydney's Patreon stuff. So this is our read-along. So we tend to do read-alongs. Like we read a series and all that. So I haven't participated in any of the read-alongs. We did do the Mistborn trilogy. I started, but I had so many other books going on, like tours and stuff, I didn't get the chance to. I do want to actually pick up that trilogy though, because I think I'll enjoy it, because what I did read, I did enjoy. So this is actually the first read-along that she's done that I participated in. And this was going to be a complete DNF, because I read about I can't even remember what I read. I read about maybe 50, 60 pages, and I was not vibing with it. I was so confused. I did not know what was going on, and I was like, I don't think this one's for me. I've only read one other urban fantasy, which was A Dark and Hollow Star, but to me that had a lot of magic in it, and I quite enjoyed it. As in this, I was like, what's going on? Like, the first chapter went off with a bang, and I was like, I'm gonna love this. And then as I was reading it, I was like, I don't understand a single thing that's going on. But I ended up persevering, because in one of Sydney's sprints, I said to her I was struggling with it, and she said she was too. She struggled. She didn't understand things. Like, she wanted to, like, it. She had to read it purely because she was part of the Green Boat Saga read along that's happening on BookTube. That's why we're doing this alongside her. But there's an actual proper read along on BookTube for this series, and so she was one of the people on a live to talk, so she had to read it basically. I'm glad I persevered, and I'm glad she told me to persevere, unless like it really wasn't for me, because as I kept reading, it did start picking up. I think something clicked in my head where I started understanding things, and then it got to the point where I couldn't put this book down. I wanted to continue reading, and it ended in such a fantastic way. I personally won't buy the rest of the book's actual physical copy, just because I know I wouldn't reread this again, kind of thing. But I have actually got them both on my Kindle to continue on with the series, but also I'm not paying money for a paperback, which I know for well I'll read, but I won't keep, because I'm enjoying it, but I don't think it's going to be like my all-time favourite series that I have to keep, sort of thing. But yeah, I was surprised that actually as I got into this book that I did start enjoying it, and so I gave this 4 stars, and this actually I'm glad I stuck with, and I think going into the second and third book I probably am going to enjoy a lot more, because now I actually understand the world, I understand what Jade does, I understand the characters, and yeah, and I'm very intrigued about this one particular character, because he's pretty much turned around and said excuse me, that he does not want to carry Jade, and I'm like, ooh, so I want to know what happens there. But yeah, really glad I stuck with this and pushed through, because in the end I did actually enjoy it, and I'm really excited to carry on with the read along to see whether the book series will be a 4 star or whether they do climb up to a 5 star. And then onto a book that wasn't on my TBR. It's very shiny, so I'm sorry, the light's gonna be a bit annoying. But basically, it's an Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. Now, the reason why I read this was because Sorcery of Thorns by the same author is Ashley Frolic Through Friction. I can never say it. Her book Patreon book clubs. She does it by monthly, so it was January and February, and the two books were Sorcery of Thorns and A Poppy War. So I had, as you saw, quite chunky books. So I didn't really want to read another chunky book like Poppy War, so I ended up going for Sorcery of Thorns just because it was shorter. But I actually own this, and I actually really wanted to pick this up purely because I don't like the shiny cover, and it was just in the way on my bookshelves. So I was like, do you know what? I might as well read it because I wanted to sort of get used to Margaret's writing style for the other book that we were going to be reading. And I was also originally going to be like, once I've read it, I can unhaul it. Am I going to unhaul it now? No, because I absolutely love Margaret Rogerson's writing. So this is her first book, this is her debut, and compared to the other two books, which I'll get to in a minute, that I read, this isn't at all brilliant. This is just a very simple fae sort of romance. It's the enemies to lovers sort of romance. We've obviously got the fantasy side of it, with the fae being not quite nice. There's some fae that are quite horrible and all that, which I really did like the twist on that, because some books that I've read, they make out that fae are like the lovely creatures and all that, when actually not always. So this is a 5-star because I flew through this and I really enjoyed it. But if I compare it to the other two books that I read, this is not my top book because it's just a very simple, easy read. But I cannot fault Rogerson's writing and her character building, because she does it. So I read this purely because I knew I was reading Sorcery of Thorns and I wanted to see what her writing style was like, because if I did not like her writing style and things like that, I might possibly not like the book. But it's safe to say I love her writing. I love her as an author. She's become a new favourite. So this was a 5-star. And then going on to Sorcery of Thorns, which is again a shiny one. Like, I don't particularly like these shiny covers. They are quite annoying just because I have a ring light. But hey ho. But as much as I was like, oh, I'm going to get rid of that book, I'm now going to make room so I can keep this because it's a series. It's a author that I actually quite like. So Sorcery of Thorns is a lot darker than Enchantment of Ravens. This is about Elizabeth, who is pretty much been raised and born at one of the great libraries, and she's basically training up to be like a keymaster sort of thing to protect all of these grimoires, because that's what the libraries hold, are all these grimoires that are spell books that like sorcerers have sort of done, but basically if you unleash them, or you know, they can turn into nasty monsters and blah blah blah. And basically Elizabeth is protecting them, but then something happens. Someone seems to unleash one of the level 8 sort of grimoires. It turns into a monster and pretty much kills a lot of people, and Elizabeth finds like a sword from one of the person who ends up bringing her up in this great library, the keymaster. She gives her a sword. She manages to kill this monster, but everyone believes that she's the one who tried to steal the grimoire and made it turn into a monster. So she's been accused of that. And so this sorcerer, who's her sworn enemy, called Nathaniel Thorn, who is like his like sort of sorcery stuff is necromancer and all of that. He's taken her to this particular massive big like royalty place to determine whether she's guilty or not. But along the way, these demons come and try attack them all, and Nathaniel learns that actually she's probably innocent and that there's something going on. And then they end up working together to find out what's going on. The romance in this is brilliant. It was such a slow burn romance. Like, it was enemies to lovers, but it was so like, it was such a slow romance, and I was like, come on, get to it. You both like each other. It's really clear to us readers. You just don't seem to notice it. But I love this. It gave me a bit of Harry Potter vibes. It was such a dark fantasy and I absolutely loved it. But what I loved most about it is we have a like side character called Silas, who is a demon, he's sort of not a slave, but he is bonded with Nathaniel, and Silas can sort of, if Nathaniel needs a boost with his power or something, he can lend his power and all that. But Silas is a very, very, very powerful demon. And I loved him, like his side character, and something happened to him and my heart broke. And in the end of this book, it left it in a way, it left it, I feel, like an open ending. So it could be, this is just the only book, nothing else. Or it could open up that there might be another book. If Margaret Rogerson watches YouTube, I want her to write a second book to this, because honestly, I think she could easily make like a series out of this, and I need to know what happens with this ending, because I love Silas and how Silas's character sort of ended. I'm like, oh, but this was brilliant. I loved it. I read it in a day. It did not take me long, and it was brilliant. It was 10 times better than Enchantment of Ravens, and I kind of got to the point where I think Rogerson's books are going to get better and better the more she writes. Love this. Definitely another firm favourite of this month, but a top fave for this year. Then we're leaving to the second from last book, which is Vesper Team by Margaret Rogerson. This is a newer release. After reading those two books, I was like, I need to pick this one up. So I treated myself to this book, and I love this even more than the other two, which I love those two just as much. So it's kind of shocking that I could love this even more. This was dark, so dark. So we follow Artemisia, who is training to be a Grey Sister, which is a nun who cleanses the bodies of the deceased so that their souls can pass on. Otherwise, they will rise as spirits with a ravenous hunger for the living. So basically, she tries to make these spirits go up to heaven instead of being spirits where they become reverence, where they become quite nasty and all that. But basically, she does all that. Everything sort of seems fine. And then her covenant got attacked by possessed soldiers, which hasn't happened in a very, very long time. And so then there's members thinking, okay, some dark magic has happened for the fact that this has happened. And one of the sisters told Artemisia to go and find this particular sister who has this relic that's got a powerful revenant in, and if you use it, her power can destroy these soldiers and all that. But when she got there, someone had already attacked the sister, and so this relic is pretty much around for anyone to touch. So Artemisia ends up I can't remember what I think she ends up like absorbing the relic and wearing it, and so the reverend ends up being inside her. And so she's like, I suppose you could say she's possessed, but she's not possessed because she's in control of her body. But then it becomes clear that she is obviously sort of got a reverend in her, and so they're working together to find out what's going on. It's very dark, it's very grim. It is, if there wasn't this humour in this book, it would be quite a morbid story. But the banter and humour between Artemisia and the reverend was amazing. I was howling. At one point I was crying because I was laughing so much. Like, a lot of this book I have highlighted like anything because of the humour side of things. I just love that we have pretty much two morally grey characters and how they work together. It was so good, and I love the fact that this was a dark fantasy and we're not sort of following your normal magic. We're following spirits having a lot of power, and especially these reverends, which are in some sense gods. There's massive big twists and turns in here. Like, there's this one particular character who you think is a baddie all the way through, and I was so adamant he was, and it turned out he wasn't, and that someone else was the baddie. And it kind of ended in a sense that there could be another book, and I'd love there to be another book because I loved it. I want to see how Artemisia's story unfolds, because it took me a while to work out why this was called Vesper Team, because I was like, most books like with their titles, it sort of links into the story, or the story has the title in it. But this for quite a while didn't explain why it was called Vesper Team, and then it did. And basically Artemisia at the end of this is turned into a Vesper Team. Long story what it's about. And so I kind of feel like this could open up to have like maybe a duology or a series, purely just because I think you can follow her journey and her and this reverent. Honestly, the ending of this book, I was so on edge of my seat because I was like, oh my god, like, is that the end? Is it, like, no, it can't be. And there was like a few moments, but this by far is a 5 out of 5. If I could give it more, I would give it more. I absolutely love it. It's definitely going to be my top book of 2022. Like, I can still remember everything about this book and all my reactions. I just loved it, and if you haven't read it already, please do, because it was brilliant. And then lastly, which I actually read from the library but I gave like back because I needed to, is Ready Player 2. I read Ready Player 1 last year and I wasn't overly bothered by it. Now, I think the reason why that was purely because I have watched the movie thousands of times, and I think because I watched the movie, the book didn't do it for me because it was extremely different to the movie. The book mainly followed more on the 80s nostalgia. It did follow the game, like them finding Halliday's eggs, but I don't feel like it was as much as what the movie showed, in my opinion. So I kind of wasn't really fond of that book, and I was very much, I'm not going to bother reading the second book if I didn't like the first book. But I really wasn't in the mood to give it a go, and as much as it wasn't on my TBR, I was like, you know what, let's get it from the library, let's see if I like it. Like, you know, if I start reading it and it's a complete flop for me, then I know it's not for me. I read like the first chapter and I was like, I think I'm going to love this book, and continued reading it and read it again in a day. A lot of these books I read in a day, maybe 2 days at max. I loved it. Like, I feel because this wasn't a movie, you know, I could appreciate the story a lot more, but I loved it. It was showing a more futuristic side of things. Like, it definitely had like sci-fi vibes in my opinion, especially the fact that we had AIs, and I'm quite fascinated about them, although they scare me and I don't want us to have AIs in this world. iRobot, guys, iRobot. But yeah, it was so good. Like, I can't really go into it because it will spoil the story for you, but it basically follows what happened after Wade wins the eggs, and like him and his team sort of work together. They all own the oasis and stuff like that. And basically, the story is that Halliday leaves another egg, and it's basically these people have to find these 7 shards, but there's no actual like with the Easter eggs, it was they would take over Oasis, get all this money and all that for the shards. There was no actually winning sort of thing, but it turned out that there was massive big reason behind it, and the winning thing was interesting. The ending of this book was brilliant because we had a different point POV, and it was an AI's POV, and I was just like, oh, this is brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. I loved it from the get-go. I was so surprised at how much I loved this book. I loved the reference to the films. Like, they had a lot of the Matrix reference in this book, and I love the Matrix. It's very much like my kind of thing. And you think of the Matrix, of them being hooked up and all that, that kind of is what Ready Player 2 is about. You're in a game where they actually can feel, sense, taste things in this game. Like, it's not the Oasis that like you know in the first book. It's more advanced and everything. Like, even people are deaf or lost their limbs, disabled, all of that, they can go into the Oasis and be a normal person, but they can actually feel everything and stuff. As in the previous Oasis headsets and all that, you can be like a normal person, but you can't feel anything or anything like that. You still know you're in your actual body. As in this, a lot of people went into the Oasis because of these headsets, because it was brilliant. I loved like the disability rep. I loved that there was a massive big whole page of LGBTQ rep, and saying that, you know, these people, a lot of people who were very anti-gay, anti-lesbian, or like anti-trans, everything, but they ended up having the opportunity to be a woman. And so it then opened eyes, and people were very much like, you know, regardless of who you are at birth or who you love and all that, everyone is pretty much getting the same thing, like same enjoyment. So does it really matter if it's a guy and a guy, or a girl and a girl, or we have a transsexual, non-binary, all of that. So that was really good. The disability rep was really good. I also really liked the fact that the relationship between the gang all kind of got a little bit heated. So like a lot of them sort of moved on and they had like wives or fiancés, babies. It also was Wade and Artemis weren't together, so that was like, oh. So it was really interesting to see them sort of fall apart and then all get back together and how everything ends. It was brilliant. I loved it. I honestly loved it. It was 5-star read. This is my most surprising book, and yeah, I'm really glad that I actually did take the push to read it, because I think if I didn't and I just never bothered, I would have missed out. And then lastly, which was on my Kindle, I also read When Snowflakes Fall. Yeah, that was a complete flop for me. It is a romance. It had a few dark bits in it, which I did kind of appreciate. That was a nice little twist. But for me, there was no world or character building. Like, basically, we follow these two characters who have been, in their own way or other, been hurt by love. So our main guy, his wife was cheating on him. She was pregnant. He assumed it was his baby. Turned out that actually no, it wasn't his baby. It was the person she was cheating him on and all that. But she was going to make him believe it was his own. So obviously he has no trust in love and blah blah blah. And then we follow the main female protagonist, which is like mainly her, whose husband and son died in a car crash. Like, not their fault. It was a woman on the phone and all didn't pay attention and killed them outright on Christmas. And so A, she does not like Christmas anymore, and B, she doesn't want to experience love again, because she feels like she had that love and she'll never get again, sort of thing. And basically they meet and they fall in love, but it was done in a way that there was no world building. Like, literally, you've got like a few chapters of them explaining why they don't like to be in love and all that, and then they decide to give it a chance, and then boom, they meet and then they fall in love. I was just like, oh. So for me, it was a 3-star. It was just simple. It was an easy read. It didn't really have anything outstanding for me. I really wasn't overly bothered by either character, in my opinion. We obviously had a third character, which I didn't particularly understand who it was till the end, and then I was like, oh. And I kind of felt it was a bit like, it was just a bit too far-fetched and silly. Yeah, but this was for the Buzzwordathon challenge that's going on, because it was the 5W, so when fit that prompt. It was a Christmas read, and I read it literally on the 31st of January, so I was like, yeah. But I'm glad I wish I chose another book, but I really struggled finding a book that fit those prompts. But it's fine, we read it. It was a 3-star, we're not going on. But yeah, they're the 12, 13 books, I can't remember. They're the books I read. I'm very happy because a lot of them were 5 stars, and that is a good read for me. But yeah, thank you for watching, take care, and I shall see you again soon. Bye!